In this video, we're going to look at an application that retrieves the astronomy picture of the day from NASA's API. So let's take a look. Before we do anything, let's just run it, see what happens. Here's the index file. I'm going to open it in my default browser. And here we go, astronomy picture of the day. It's got a place for me to enter the date. And by default, our JavaScript has generated a date in the correct format because NASA wants a particular format when you request a certain day's picture. So it's the year dash month dash date. We can click the view button, and this pulls up to today's picture of the day from NASA because I'm making this on 4/24, April 24th. The Medulla Nebula supernova remnant, and there we can see that's a fantastic picture. That's awesome. And then it even has, you know, because it's NASA, so they're trying to educate people. It gives us information about that. If I want to go look at yesterday's picture, I can change the date here, and I can retrieve yesterday's picture. So it's a water spout from Florida. What's the day before? Ooh, a stellar nursery in Perseus. And then you can read the information down here. So all of this information, this title, the picture itself, and the narrative about the picture all comes from their API. They're all data fields. So before we go look at the application, let's open up Postman. And I want to actually test NASA's API. So the address for this is HTTPS. And I don't want to do autocomplete because I want you to see this. https://api.nasa excuse me .gov/planetary/Apod, astronomy picture of the day. Okay, and if I go there, it tells me error, the API key is missing. So if you would go to NASA's site and take a look, you can go here and you can register to get an API key to access their API. But they do have a demo key that we can use. Now the demo key is going to be limited to how many times I can hit their server before it stops working. So we have to supply an API key. And if you look down here, there are key value pairs for things that we need to supply to the API. And they are requiring that we supply an API key. And they even tell us it's API_key. So let's put that in here, API_key. And if you look, as I'm typing this, it's extending it onto the address up here. API key, and the value is demo, all capital letters, _key. So you can try this. Okay. So we have to provide an API key. Now, how do you get an API key? Usually you have to go to a site and register to get an API key. And depending on the site, there's tons of free APIs out there. A lot of them require you to log in because they don't want people abusing it. But a lot of them are free, but there are paid services too. The better the information is, or especially if it comes from a commercial source, they might have fees. You might have to pay a yearly fee to access it. But if you're making millions of dollars with the app you're writing today, you can afford to pay their thousands of dollars in fees. But there are like API, like NASA, that's funded by our government. So this doesn't require anything. Just the demo key is going to only let us hit it so many times before it says, okay, that's enough. If I want to use it in a commercial application, I would have to get a better key that lets me hit it more often. All right, so let's try and send this now with the API key and the value of demo key assigned. I can go ahead and try and send this, and I get it back. Here's our JSON response. It's got the copyright. It's got today's date on it. It's got the explanation that tells us all about it. Remember, we're using that for the caption under the picture. It's got the URL where the picture came from. If I click on that, it's going to open up here. I can do a GET request for that picture and send it. There's the picture we were looking at earlier. It's huge compared to what's being displayed here, but it is the same picture. Okay, I don't want to save that particular call. Media type is image. So depending if you're on an API that could send you pictures or text, you might want to look to make sure they sent you an image before you try to display the image. And then the title, we saw that being displayed above the picture when we ran the application. That was up here, and the narrative was down here. Okay, so this is the data we're getting back. Now, NASA also allows us to specify a date. So we did this without specifying a date, so by default, we got this date. But if we want to, NASA will also let us specify, and we saw that in the application. We're adding another key onto our request here, and I'm putting in today's date. I can't remember if I need to have that in quotation marks or not. I'm going to try it with it in quotation marks, and if it doesn't work, we'll switch it. Okay, time data. This format does not so it doesn't want the quotation marks. So when you can see up here, API key equals demo key and date equals today's date. Okay. And there I get the results for today, but now I have the ability to come up here. Let's see what was happening on the 20th of this month, 4/20. And I get this picture. Not sure what it was. Some kind of nebula for 4/20. It was the Seahorse Nebula. I should have known that one. So it tells you about the Seahorse Nebula. That was on the 20th. So we have a couple key value pairs that we can specify. Let's take a look at the application. We've used Postman to go through and test to see how the site works. It's a great way to test. It's hard to see those results that we just saw down here in your application using the F12 tools when you're building an application. That's why I like Postman. All right, so how does this application work? Here's our HTML page. It has a label for the date. It has a field where the date's going to be displayed. It has a button where we're going to type the date, I should say. It has a button to call view, and it has a div called display. I assume that's where the picture and all of the code is going to go eventually when we run apod.javascript. Okay. We do have some CSS that just does some basic formatting. Let's look at our JavaScript and see what's going on here. Let's start at the top. Get date string for a date. We've worked with dates in the past and date objects. So this is taking today's date, excuse me, getting the full year. It's getting the month. If you remember back with the date object, it's 0 numbered for the month. So January is month 0, February is month 1. So it's adding 1 to the date. And it's also getting the date part of the date object. Okay. We have a display picture function. Its job is going to be to display the picture or display a message if there's an error. So we'll come back and look at that in a minute. We have a display error function that's going to display an error if something happens poorly, if something goes wrong. Okay. And down here we have our document ready, which is going to initiate all of these things. So first thing we're doing is grabbing today's date, and then we're converting that date to the format using this date string. It's converting it to the format that NASA requires for their API. That's why it's important to understand how some of those things work. Okay. And then once it's in there, we're setting today's date to that box. Remember, by default, it had today's date in there, and we could change it if we wanted to. We're pulling out the, setting the value, and we're just changing the focus back there. And then here's our click event. When somebody calls the click event, it's going to check to see if it's a valid date or not. And as long as it's a valid date, we're going to call the get date string for the object. We're going to contact, there's that address, the domain. So we have text here, api.nasa.gov-planetary/apod, astronomy picture of the day. And then we have our request. It's going to be that API with the demo key, and then today's date. It's pulling the date out of that date box. Okay. It's taking the domain and the request as two separate things, and then it's concatenating them together as URL. So we're just kind of building up that key that we saw in Postman. We're building it up with a domain and a request. Okay. All right, so what ultimately happens? We say, hey, go to that address. We're calling the fetch API, and it's going to wait. When we get a response, it's going to send the response and turn it into JSON. And when the JSON gets converted, it's going to call display picture, and it's going to pass that JSON response, the decoded JSON response, to this display picture function that we saw up above. We haven't really looked at it closely yet. If something happens, it's going to display an error. So that's the fetch API. It's pretty much that simple. Get a response. When you get a response, convert it to JSON, and then call this callback function. Once it comes in, call the callback function, and the callback function will handle displaying the images and the things, just like so many applications we've done already. Okay, so this is the AJAX part. That's all it is. Usually there's a section before the AJAX where we build some things up to get ready for it, but that's the AJAX part. Let's go look at display picture and see what it does. All right, so display picture accepts data. That was that JSON object that we passed to it. Okay, if it's data.error, it's going to create a span. It's going to take this HTML that starts out with a blank string, and it's going to add a span to it with an error message. Okay, if the data is a code, we're going to also, there's another problem. We're going to display an error message. So if there's an error or a code, those aren't good things. Otherwise, here's where success. Let's just display the picture. So we're going to start out by generating some HTML. So we're going to take that HTML that started as a blank string, and we're going to start concatenating things onto it. So in all of these, it's using template strings to build all these things. That's the little backtick mark. Remember, that's up above your tilde key. It's right above your tab key. So if you don't remember template strings, that just lets us type a bunch of code in a string. So it's creating a span. Oh, that's the error. We're down here on the good part. Sorry, I got sidetracked. So we're going to create an H3, and we're going to take the data, and we're going to get its title. Remember, it's a JSON object. If I go back to Postman, there's title right here. The dark seahorse and sepia. Oh, actually, I think we're doing today, so let's go back and do today again. The title, the Medulla Nebula Supernova Remnant. Okay. So that's where it's getting that. It's pulling out that title, and we're using it. So data.title, data.media type. If it's an image, we're going to display the image. Okay, so NASA's media picture of the day sometimes maybe isn't an image. We'll see what it is as we look down through here. So we're checking to see if it's an image, and if it is, we're creating an image tag that's using the URL, data.url for the image, and its width to display the picture. And then we have a break. But sometimes maybe NASA's picture of the day actually has video. And in that case, they're generating, adding onto the HTML an iframe. And we probably haven't covered iframes, but iframes are a way to display objects, in this case, a video object inside of a page. So they're generating an iframe, which has that URL inside of it for wherever the video is stored, and some options that go, we don't want a frame around our iframe, and apparently we want to allow people to take it to full screen if we want to. Okay. The default, if none of those works, we're adding onto the HTML, we're concatenating on image with a source of image not available, which is in this images folder right here, not available image. So it's going to use that image that's built into this application on our web server and display that image instead. So it's decoding these pieces of data that came back from the JSON using the key name, which will substitute in the values, just key value pairs. Like a map or like a dictionary in Python, JSON is just key value pairs. Sometimes the trick is getting out the right key and value out. Okay. Down here, they're adding on the date. Again, coming from that JSON object, it's taking the data.date. Then we're checking the data.copyright and generating that. And then lastly, we're closing out our div by generating a /div. And then we're concatenating on, in a paragraph, data.explanation, which was the long set of prose that we had that explains what we're seeing in the picture. And then finally, we're taking that display section in HTML. This display section, it was a div right there. We're updating its HTML with the HTML that we just generated using the JavaScript object pieces. Okay. And that's it. This is just decoding JSON. Okay. The actual API work was done right here. It gets the JSON response, and then we have to have some kind of function, in this case, this display picture, to decode the JSON and use the pieces of it we want and substitute them into our page. And we're dynamically generating HTML to display those things. And that's how the picture of the day application works.